"Figure it out yourself, old man," my son-in-law said when I asked for a glass of water. I had a herniated disc and simply asked my son-in-law to bring me a glass of water. He looked up from his phone and said, "Figure it out yourself, old man. I'm not your butler." My daughter sat right there at the kitchen table and said absolutely nothing. I just smiled and struggled to my feet like it didn't bother me. But that moment changed everything. My name is Theodore Rodriguez, I'm 58 years old, and that night I made one phone call that would destroy everything Vincent Thompson thought he controlled. Let me back up. 3 months ago, I threw out my back lifting boxes in the garage. Doctor said it was a herniated disc, probably needed surgery eventually. The pain came in waves, some days manageable, other days feeling like someone was driving a knife between my vertebrae. I'd been a federal agent for 32 years, so I knew how to work through discomfort, but this was different. Vincent and my daughter Linda had been living with me for 2 years now, ever since his logistics company hit what he called a temporary rough patch. Temporary, that word had stretched longer than anyone expected. I'm a retired FBI financial crimes investigator. Spent 3 decades tracking down con artists, embezzlers, and fraudsters who thought they were smarter than the system. You'd think that experience would have made me more suspicious about what was happening in my own house. You'd be wrong. The Rodriguez estate sits on 3 acres of prime real estate outside Charleston, South Carolina. My grandfather built the main house in 1954 with his own hands, solid brick and oak that's weathered hurricanes and decades of southern summers. The property's worth about $825,000 now according to the latest county assessment. Vincent knew that number because I'd caught him looking up comparable sales on his laptop more than once, always closing the screen when I walked into the room. The house has good bones, wide front porch with white columns, oak floors throughout the main level, and a study where I used to review case files late into the night. The guest cottage out back is where Vincent and Linda had been staying, though Vincent spent most of his time in the main house, claiming he needed better Wi-Fi for his business calls. That Tuesday afternoon in November, I was laid up on the living room couch, my back screaming from the morning's attempt to get the newspaper from the front porch. The kitchen felt like it was on the other side of the world. Vincent sat in what had become his usual chair, the leather recliner with the best view of both the TV and the front driveway. He was scrolling through his phone, probably checking his fake company's fake revenue reports. "Vincent," I said, trying to keep the pain out of my voice, "could you grab me a glass of water from the kitchen? Ice, if it's not too much trouble?" He didn't look up from his phone, just sat there for about 10 seconds, letting my request hang in the air like something unpleasant. "Figure it out yourself, old man," he said, finally. "I'm not your butler." The words hit me like a physical slap, not because of what he said, but because of how easily he said it. Like I was something that had stopped mattering a long time ago. Linda was sitting at the kitchen table about 10 feet away, her laptop open, probably working on some freelance graphic design project. She heard every word. I know she did because she looked up when Vincent spoke, met my eyes for about 2 seconds, then went right back to her screen like nothing had happened. That silence told me everything I needed to know about where her loyalties had settled over the past 2 years. Now, I could have gotten angry. I could have reminded Vincent whose house he was sitting in, whose electricity was powering his phone, whose food he'd been eating for free. I could have pointed out that in my 32 years with the Bureau, I dealt with plenty of men who thought they were entitled to other people's property. Instead, I smiled and said, "Sure thing, son." I got up slowly, each movement sending fire through my lower back, and made my way to the kitchen. The tile was cool under my bare feet, a contrast to the heat building behind my eyes. I filled a glass with water from the refrigerator dispenser, added ice, and stood there for a moment, really looking at Vincent Thompson for the first time in months. Here's what I knew about my son-in-law. He claimed to run Thompson Maritime Solutions, a shipping logistics company that specialized in coordinating cargo transfers along the East Coast. He drove a late-model Ford F-150, wore polo shirts that cost more than my monthly electric bill, and had a laugh that filled rooms whether anyone had said something funny or not. At dinner parties, he told stories about difficult clients and complex shipping schedules, like he was running Amazon's logistics division. But in 2 years of living under my roof, I'd never seen him go to an actual office. Never seen him meet with actual clients in person. Never seen any checks from this supposedly thriving business. What I had seen was an increasing number of phone calls where he'd step outside and speak in hushed, urgent tones. I'd also noticed that mail addressed to Thompson Maritime Solutions had been coming to my address for months. Mail that Vincent always intercepted before I could see it, usually with some explanation about forwarding services or temporary address changes. That glass of water in my hand felt heavier than it should have, not because of the water, but because of what I was finally allowing myself to see. That night, after Linda and Vincent went to bed, I did what I should have done months ago. I went to my study, closed the door, and fired up my laptop. The room still smelled like the leather-bound case files I used to bring home, though those were long gone. My desk faced the window overlooking the back garden where my wife Sarah used to grow tomatoes before cancer took her 4 years ago. I started with the basics. South Carolina Secretary of State Business Registry. Thompson Maritime Solutions LLC was incorporated 3 years ago with Vincent Thompson listed as the sole owner and registered agent. The company's stated purpose was logistics and freight coordination for maritime shipping operations. Annual reports showed revenue of $1.6 million for the previous year. Impressive numbers, too impressive maybe. Then I looked at the registered agent address. 847 Magnolia Lane, Charleston, SC 2000-9412. My address, Vincent had registered his business using my home address without asking me, without even mentioning it. In the bureau, we called that mail fraud. It was also the first red flag in what I was starting to realize might be a much bigger problem. I kept digging, using search techniques I'd refined over 3 decades of following money trails. IRS public records, South Carolina Department of Revenue filings, federal contractor databases. The picture that emerged made my coffee go cold in the cup. Thompson Maritime Solutions owed $445,000 to various creditors spread across 3 states. The company had been sued 4 times in the past 18 months for non-payment of invoices. One lawsuit, filed by a shipping company in Savannah, claimed Vincent had collected advance payments for cargo coordination services that were never provided. Another, from a trucking firm in Virginia, alleged he'd used their equipment without payment and refused to return it. But here's the part that made my investigators' instincts start screaming. That $1.6 million in revenue Vincent claimed, the actual revenue based on bank records I could access through federal databases, was closer to $160,000. Vincent wasn't just failing at business. He was lying about it on a scale that suggested federal tax evasion. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the screen. Thompson Maritime Solutions wasn't a logistics company. It was a house of cards built on fabricated invoices, fake client contracts, and inflated revenue reports. Vincent had been running a pyramid scheme using new investor money to pay earlier debts while skimming enough to maintain his lifestyle. And now that the scheme was collapsing, he was looking for an exit strategy. I spent the next 2 hours cross-referencing addresses, phone numbers, and business associates. What I found made me reach for the bourbon I kept in the desk drawer for particularly ugly cases. Vincent had done this before. Between 2018 and 2020, he'd been married to a woman named Patricia Hawkins in Jacksonville, Florida. Patricia was 67 years old when they met, a widow who owned a $600,000 waterfront condo. Vincent moved in 6 months after the wedding, citing financial difficulties with his import business. 18 months later, Patricia was diagnosed with early-onset dementia. Vincent became her legal guardian 3 months after that. The condo was sold for her care. Patricia was placed in a memory facility. Vincent disappeared with approximately $480,000 in liquidated assets. Patricia Hawkins died in that facility 8 months later. The official cause was complications from dementia, but I noticed something interesting in the medical records I was able to access. Her symptoms had appeared suddenly, progressed rapidly, and didn't match the typical patterns of organic dementia. I made a note to have someone look into what medications Patricia had been taking in her final months, but Vincent's pattern was clear now. Find vulnerable older people with property, move in as the helpful younger relative or spouse. Gradually isolate them from support networks, create or accelerate mental health crises, gain legal guardianship, liquidate assets, disappear. The only difference with me was that I wasn't a lonely widow. I was a retired federal agent with a daughter who loved me. Vincent had to be more careful, more subtle. He couldn't just marry me and take guardianship. He had to find another way in. That's when I found the medical reports, buried in Vincent's email account, which I accessed using password recovery techniques that weren't entirely legal but weren't entirely illegal either. I found correspondence with Dr. Marcus Webb, a private physician in Mount Pleasant. Dr. Webb specialized in geriatric assessments for guardianship proceedings. The emails dated back 6 months. Vincent had been feeding Dr. Webb reports about my supposed declining mental state, forgetting conversations, leaving the stove on, getting lost driving to familiar places, all symptoms I'd never experienced, documented in detail as if Vincent had been keeping careful notes. Dr. Webb had scheduled a comprehensive cognitive assessment for me next month, the assessment that would provide the medical foundation for a guardianship petition. I sat in that study until 3 in the morning, printing documents and organizing evidence the way I used to prepare federal cases. Financial fraud, mail fraud, elder abuse, identity theft. If I was right about Patricia Hawkins' possibly murder, Vincent Thompson wasn't just stealing my money. He was stealing my life, one fabricated symptom at a time. The next morning, I made coffee and sat on the front porch, watching Vincent load his truck for another day of business meetings. He was wearing a navy polo and khakis, looking every inch the successful entrepreneur. When he saw me, he waved and called out, "How's the back feeling today, Ted?" "Better," I said. "Much better." That afternoon, I called Benjamin Foster. Ben had been my partner for the last 8 years of my bureau career, and he was now a supervisory special agent in the financial crimes unit. We'd worked dozens of cases together, and he knew I didn't make calls like this unless I was sure. "Ben," I said when he answered, "I need to report a federal crime." Multiple federal crimes, actually, and I need to do it carefully because the suspect is living in my house. There was a pause. "Ted, what are you telling me?" "I'm telling you, my son-in-law is running a long-con elder abuse scheme, and I'm about to become his next victim. How fast can you get a team down here?" Ben listened while I laid out the evidence. Vincent's failing business, the mail fraud, the forged medical reports, the pattern with Patricia Hawkins. When I finished, there was a long pause on the line, Ted. He said finally, "What you're describing is wire fraud, mail fraud, elder abuse, and potentially homicide. We're talking federal charges with serious time attached. I know. How long do you need to build a case? Send me everything. Give me a week to coordinate with the Charleston field office. And Ted, be careful. If this guy killed his first wife to cover his tracks, you're in real danger." I spent the next week playing the perfect target. It was harder than I expected, pretending to be the confused old man Vincent wanted me to be. Every morning, I made a show of forgetting where I'd put my reading glasses. I asked Linda the same question twice during dinner conversations. I let Vincent see me struggling with the TV remote, the coffee maker, simple tasks I'd been doing for decades, and I watched him take notes. He was documenting my supposed decline in a small notebook he thought I hadn't noticed. Every forgotten word, every moment of apparent confusion, every sign that Theodore Rodriguez was losing his mental faculties. He was building his case for Dr. Webb's assessment, collecting evidence that would support a guardianship petition. What Vincent didn't know was that I was building a case too. The recording device I'd borrowed from Ben was smaller than a quarter and picked up conversations from across the room. I captured Vincent on the phone with Dr. Webb discussing accelerated deterioration and the need to move up the timeline for evaluation. I recorded him talking to someone about power of attorney documents, about how the old man won't be competent to make his own decisions much longer. Most damaging of all, I got him bragging to someone about his previous success in Jacksonville. Just like the last one, he said during a phone call he thought I couldn't hear. Create the problem, document the decline, get control, liquidate everything. This one's worth more, so I need to be more careful, but the principle's the same. Linda was harder to read during this period. I watched her watching Vincent, and sometimes I caught something in her expression that looked like doubt. When he'd make comments about my memory or suggest I needed help with basic tasks, she'd glance at me with an expression I couldn't quite interpret. Was she starting to see what I was seeing, or was she just worried about her father's decline? The following Tuesday, Vincent made his big move. He waited until after dinner, then produced a stack of papers from his briefcase like he was presenting a birthday gift. "Ted," he said, setting the documents on the dining room table between us, "we need to discuss your situation. I've prepared some legal documents that will help protect everyone." I looked at the papers but didn't touch them. The dining room chandelier cast warm light over what was about to become a battlefield. What kind of documents? Power of attorney, financial, and medical. "It's just a precaution." Vincent's voice had that careful, patient tone people use when they're talking to children or invalids. "You've been having memory issues lately, and we're all concerned about your ability to manage your affairs." Linda sat across from me, her face pale in the chandelier light. She was hearing her husband discuss taking legal control of her father's life, and she wasn't saying anything to stop it. "What if I don't want to sign?" I asked. That's when Vincent's mask slipped, just like I knew it would. His concerned expression hardened into something that had been waiting underneath for 2 years. "Then we'll have to discuss other options," he said, his voice dropping the pretense of warmth. "There are facilities that specialize in cases like yours. Linda and I have been talking, and frankly, a house this size isn't safe for someone in your condition." He was threatening me. "In my own dining room at my own table, with my own daughter sitting 3 feet away. We've already visited a very nice place in Mount Pleasant," he continued. "Memory care specialists. They have an opening next month. The staff there is trained to handle patients who become difficult about their care needs." Linda's hands were trembling. She was staring at her husband like she was seeing him clearly for the first time. "Vincent," she whispered, What are you saying? I'm saying your father needs professional care, and if he won't accept help voluntarily, we may need to pursue legal guardianship for his own protection. I smiled at him across the table. After 32 years of interrogating criminals, I knew when someone had just confessed. Vincent, I said calmly, you just made the biggest mistake of your life. His jaw tightened. He'd expected me to fold under pressure, to sign his documents out of fear or confusion. Don't make this harder than it needs to be, Ted. I've already consulted with attorneys about your options. I stood up slowly, letting the movement trigger the recording device one more time. I need to think about this. Give me until tomorrow. Think quickly, Vincent said. Dr. Webb wants to complete your assessment by the end of the week. That night, I sat in my study and called Ben Foster. It's time, I said. Warrant's already signed, Ben replied. Federal judge reviewed everything you sent. We'll execute at dawn. 3 teams, 1 for your house, 1 for his business address, 1 for Dr. Webb's office. This is going to be a big net. Ted, what about Linda? She doesn't know anything about this. We'll be careful. But she's going to have some hard questions to answer about what she knew and when she knew it. I hung up the phone and walked to the kitchen window. The guest cottage was dark. Vincent was probably in there planning his next move, confident that he'd backed me into a corner I couldn't escape. He had no idea that in 6 hours, a federal tactical team would be surrounding his bedroom. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on my front porch in the darkness, drinking coffee and watching the guest cottage where Vincent was probably sleeping without a care in the world. The November air was cool, carrying the scent of oak leaves and the distant salt smell of Charleston Harbor. At 5:15 a.m., I heard the vehicles before I saw them. 3 black SUVs rolled up my driveway without sirens, their headlights cutting through the pre-dawn darkness. Federal agents in tactical gear got out and positioned themselves around the property like they'd rehearsed it 100 times. Ben Foster stepped out of the lead vehicle, wearing a bulletproof vest over his dress shirt. He caught sight of me on the porch and gave a small nod before directing his team toward the guest cottage. At exactly 5:30, they knocked on Vincent's door. Vincent Thompson, federal agents. We have a warrant to search these premises. I watched from my porch as Vincent came stumbling out in boxer shorts and a t-shirt, squinting like he couldn't believe what he was seeing. His hair was sticking up, and for the first time since I'd known him, he looked smaller than life-size. There must be some mistake, he kept saying. I need to call my lawyer. This is harassment. You can call your lawyer from the field office, the lead agent replied. Step aside, sir. They spent 2 hours methodically searching the cottage. Computer hard drives, phones, financial documents, the notebook where he'd been documenting my supposed mental decline. Everything Vincent thought was private was now evidence in a federal case. Linda came out of the main house around 6 a.m., wrapping her robe tight against the morning chill. She stood beside me on the porch, watching her husband's life fall apart in real time, Dad, she whispered. What's happening? I handed her a copy of the federal search warrant. She read it twice, her face going pale in the morning light. Wire fraud, mail fraud, elder abuse, identity theft. Her voice was barely audible. Vincent's been doing this to other people. A woman named Patricia Hawkins in Jacksonville. Probably others we haven't found yet. Linda's legs gave out and she sat down hard on the porch steps. The medical appointments you've been missing. The forgetfulness, I thought. She looked up at me with tears in her eyes. I thought you were really declining. Vincent's been planning to have me declared mentally incompetent. He already had a doctor lined up to do the assessment. Once he got guardianship, he would have sold the house and disappeared with the money. While putting you in a memory care facility, Linda's voice was flat with shock, like he did to that woman in Florida. We watched as the agents led Vincent toward one of the SUVs. He was in handcuffs now, no longer the confident businessman who'd been threatening me at dinner the night before. When he saw me sitting on the porch, he turned and stared for a long moment. I raised my coffee cup in a small salute. He looked away and got into the vehicle without another word. Ben Foster walked over to where Linda and I were sitting. We got everything, he said. Financial records, communications with Dr. Webb, evidence of the mail fraud scheme. This is going to be a slam-dunk federal case. How long will he get? Linda asked. Wire fraud alone carries up to 20 years. With the elder abuse charges, the mail fraud, and the pattern of previous victims, he's looking at 10 to 15 years minimum. Maybe more if we can prove what happened to Patricia Hawkins. The agents finished loading their evidence and drove away, taking Vincent with them. The property fell quiet, except for the sound of birds waking up in the oak trees my grandfather had planted. Linda and I sat on that porch for a long time, watching the sun come up over the Rodriguez estate. Finally, she turned to me with an expression I hadn't seen since she was a little girl. I should have seen it, she said. All those comments about the house being too big, about your medical care being expensive. The way he looked at you when he thought no one was watching. He was good at hiding it. That's how predators work. When he told you to get your own water yesterday, I should have said something. I reached over and took her hand. You're saying something now. That's what counts. 2 weeks later, Vincent's lawyer, Arthur Martinez, called my attorney, Patricia Davis. Vincent wanted to make a deal. He'd sign away any claim to the Rodriguez estate in exchange for a recommendation of the minimum sentence. Take it, Patricia advised. You get guaranteed protection for the property, and he still goes to federal prison. The signing took place at the Charleston County Courthouse. Vincent sat across a metal table in an orange jumpsuit, his hands shaking as he signed document after document. Total waiver of all claims to my property, past, present, and future. The man who told me to figure it out myself was signing away every right to the house he'd tried to steal. When it was over, I walked out of that courthouse knowing the Rodriguez estate was safe. Patricia had helped me establish a revocable living trust that would protect the property from any future schemes, and Vincent Thompson was facing 12 years in federal prison. That evening, Linda and I sat on the back porch watching the sunset paint the sky orange and pink above the oak trees. What happens now? She asked. Now we rebuild, I said. This house has been in our family for 70 years. It survived hurricanes, recessions, and Vincent Thompson. It'll be here for your children someday. I don't know if I'll ever trust anyone again. You'll learn to trust your instincts. That's what I should have done sooner. Linda leaned against my shoulder the way she used to when she was small. I'm sorry I chose him over you. I'm sorry I stayed silent. You didn't know, and when you figured it out, you did the right thing. 6 months later, Vincent was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. Dr. Webb lost his medical license for participating in the guardianship fraud. Thompson Maritime Solutions was dissolved, its assets seized to pay creditors. I'm 58 years old, and I've learned something about family betrayal that I hope I never have to use again. It doesn't announce itself with dramatic gestures. It builds quietly, wearing familiar faces and speaking in concerned voices. The most dangerous person in your life might be sleeping in your guest cottage, counting your money while planning your future. But I also learned that experience matters, that professional skills never really retire, and that sometimes the system actually works when you know how to use it. The man who told me to figure it out myself learned that some problems solve themselves when you have the right phone number and 32 years of federal law enforcement experience. Justice isn't always immediate, but it's always worth the wait. Trust your instincts over their explanations. Predators count on your politeness to ignore red flags. The skills that built your career don't retire when you do. Use them to protect what matters most.